Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku was the one who snapped instead of Thanos. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The first thing Izuku Midoriya registered was not a sight, but a sound. It was a symphony of chaos, a discordant orchestra of noises his battle-honed senses struggled to parse. There was the high-pitched shriek of alien metal, the guttural roar of creatures he'd only seen in pre-Quark-era comic books, the deafening crackle of energy weapons, and beneath it all, a constant, horrifying thrum of death. One moment, he was in the dust-choked ruins of Jaka City, the lingering heat of Dabi's flames on his cheek and the phantom sensation of Shigaraki's grip on his face. The next, a swirling, golden mandala of light bloomed before him, swallowing the battlefield, his friends, and even his enemies. The disorientation was a physical blow, a gut punch of vertigo that sent the world spinning. Then his boots hit solid, albeit broken, ground. The air was thick with ozone and the coppery tang of blood. The sky wasn't the familiar blue of home, but a bruised, smoky canvas choked with monolithic, whale-like ships that blotted out the sun. Around him, a war was raging on a scale that dwarfed the Paranormal Liberation War, made it look like a skirmish in a schoolyard. What is this? Kirishima's voice, rough and disbelieving, cut through the din beside him. He was in his unbreakable form, crimson skin glinting under the alien light. Villains and heroes, everyone's here, Todoroki murmured, his bicolored hair matted with grime. An instinctual wall of ice was already rising at his back, deflecting a volley of blue energy bolts. Deku's eyes scanned the impossible scene. He saw Endeavor, his flames roaring in bewildered fury, incinerating a pack of four-armed outriders. He saw Hawks, feathers flying as he dodged and weaved through airborne Chitauri soldiers. He saw his classmates, Class 1A, huddled together for a split second in sheer shock before their training kicked in. And then, a sight that made his blood run cold, Shigaraki Tamura, his body a scarred road map of their last battle, stood not 20 feet away, a slow, horrifying grin spreading across his face as he took in the sheer, unadulterated chaos. Dabi was beside him, blue flames licking at his staples, his expression one of nihilistic ecstasy. They're enjoying this. The thought was a shard of ice in Deku's gut. DKU. Bakugo's roar was the anchor that pulled him from his stupor. A massive explosion ripped through a charging leviathan, sending armored plates and alien viscera raining down. Stop gawking and fight, you damn nerd! Bakugo was right. Analysis could come later. Survival came first. Saving people came first. One for all, full call 45%. Green lightning crackled to life around him, a familiar blanket of power in an utterly unfamiliar world. He pushed off, the sensation of float lifting him into the chaos. Black Whip, dark and sleek, shot from his arms, no longer a wild beast but a precise extension of his will. The tendrils wrapped around the leg of a falling man in a star-spangled uniform, Captain America. His mind supplied, pulling the name from the depths of pre-Quark history lessons. Deku yanked, pulling the legendary soldier out of the path of a crushing blow from a hulking, purple-skinned brute. The man landed with a grunt, his shield, impossibly real, vibranium and steel, held firm. He looked up, his eyes weary but resolute. Thanks, kid. Don't know where you came from, but glad you're on our side. Deku didn't have time to respond. Below, he saw Spider-Man, a hero he'd only read about in textbooks, overwhelmed, web shooters struggling to hold back a tide of snarling creatures. A black whip tendril shot out, ensnaring a dozen of them and slamming them into a pile of rubble. Whoa, cool! Black Spider-Man, the young hero quipped, already swinging back into the fray. Kinda. This was his purpose. This was what he did. It didn't matter the planet, it didn't matter the enemy. People were in danger. His job was to save them. He moved like a phantom, a green comet streaking across the battlefield. He pulled a woman with glowing hands, Captain Marvel, out of a pile of wreckage. He used an Air Force blast to clear a path for a group of Asgardian soldiers. He was a living, breathing rescue operation, his mind a frantic triage calculator. Who is in the most danger? Who can I get to first? But for every person he saved, he saw two more fall. The sheer, relentless number of enemies was an ocean threatening to drown them all. It was a tide of claws and teeth and energy blasts that never, ever stopped. The ground was a churned mess of dirt, rubble, and the bodies of heroes and aliens alike. The air tasted of ash. A fleeting memory surfaced, the face of a man with a monocle and a strange cloak of red and gold. Dr. Strange, his mind whispered. The man had appeared in a storm of portals, his voice echoing not in their ears, but in their minds. The universe is at stake. Everyone who can fight, we need you. The world had dissolved into golden light, and then, this apocalypse. Deku pushed the thought away. He didn't need to know why. He only needed to act. He landed atop a wrecked Chidori chariot, his eyes scanning, calculating, prioritizing. His gaze fell upon the nexus of the battle, where the Avengers' heaviest hitters were converging on the architect of this madness, Thanos, and for the first time since arriving, the sheer, crushing weight of this new world began to settle on his shoulders. The Paranormal Liberation War had been the single most devastating event in modern Japanese history. It had broken heroes, claimed lives, and scarred a nation. Deku had stood at its epicenter, and he carried the ghosts of that conflict with him every day. He thought he had seen the worst humanity, and its offshoots, had to offer. He was wrong. So terribly, cosmically wrong. From his vantage point, he could see the full, breathtaking scope of the battlefield. It stretched for miles in every direction, a hell's cape teeming with an inexhaustible army. Leviathans, colossal armored serpents, slithered through the air, their shadows swallowing entire platoons. Guerrillas from Wakanda fought alongside wizards from Kamartaj. Ravager's laser fire crisscrossed with the radiant blasts from heroes he didn't recognize. It was every nightmare, every war, every end-of-the-world scenario rolled into one cataclysmic panorama. The war in Jakku was a single, festering wound. This was a planetary gangrene. His eyes found Captain America again. The super soldier, the first hero, was a bulwark of defiance. He moved with a grace that defied his age, his shield a blur of red, white, and blue. But he was tiring. A massive blow from Thanos' double-edged sword sent him flying, his shield skittering across the dirt. Deku watched in horror as the Mad Titan stood over him, raining blow after brutal blow onto the vibranium shield. Each impact was a thunderclap, and with each one, the shield began to splinter, to crack, to break. A symbol of hope, of indomitable will, was being shattered before his eyes. It felt like a personal violation, as if his own belief in heroism was being systematically dismantled. Then he saw Thor. The god of thunder, wreathed in lightning, Stormbreaker in one hand and Mjolnir in the other. He was a maelstrom of divine power, a force of nature unto himself. But even a god could be overwhelmed. Thanos' children, the Black Order, swarmed him. Kull Obsidian's hammer met Mjolnir with a ground-shaking clang. Corvus Glaive's glaive, impossibly sharp, scored a deep gash across the Asgardian's arm. Ebony Maw, his face a mask of condescending cruelty, gestured with his long fingers, and the very earth rose up to trap Thor's legs, binding him in rock and rubble. A god was being chained. A force of nature was being subdued. A chilling realization washed over Deku. Power wasn't enough. No amount of strength, no amount of righteous fury, seemed to matter against this inevitable tide. The most jarring sight, however, was Iron Man Tony Stark. The man who had privatized world peace, the genius who had built a suit of armor around his own broken heart to protect the world. His armor, a stunning piece of nanotechnology, was a wreck. The sleek red and gold plating was scorched, dented, and in some places, torn completely away, revealing the vulnerable man beneath. He was firing repulsor blasts, rockets, and lasers, but for every drone he shot down, 3 more took its place. He was fighting a war of attrition against an enemy with infinite resources. He was losing. As Deku watched, frozen for a heartbeat, Thanos broke away from his assault on Captain America. He turned his attention to Stark, who was airborne, trying to provide cover for a retreating group of sorcerers. The Mad Titan raised his gauntlet, a golden monstrosity studded with 6 stones that pulsed with sickening, primordial light. The purple stone, the Power Stone, flared violently. A beam of pure, annihilating energy, thicker than a building, shot from the gauntlet. "Stark, look out!" Captain America screamed, his voice raw. Deku's body moved before his mind could process the command. He pushed off the chariot, float and a 45% kick propelling him like a bullet. Faster. I have to be faster. Black Whip lashed out, not at Stark, but at a massive chunk of Leviathan armor nearby. He yanked, trying to pull the makeshift shield into the path of the beam. He was too slow. The beam struck Iron Man mid-torso. There was no explosion, just a silent, terrifying concussive impact. The nanites of his suit flared, trying to redistribute the energy, but it was too much. The suit overloaded in a shower of sparks and dying blue light. Tony Stark plummeted from the sky like a stone, crashing into the earth with a sickening crunch of metal and bone. Deku landed near him, his heart hammering against his ribs. The arc reactor in Stark's chest was flickering, sputtering, a dying star. His helmet retracted, revealing a face pale, sweaty, and etched with agony. A trickle of blood ran from the corner of his mouth. Friday, damage report. Stark rasped, his voice barely a whisper. Life support critical. Multiple internal injuries detected. Arc reactor power at 4% and falling. A calm, female voice replied from the battered suit. Helplessness. It was a cold, familiar poison seeping into Deku's veins. He was standing before one of the world's greatest heroes, a man who had faced down gods and armies, and he was dying. And Deku, with all the power of One for All, could do nothing but watch. He could punch villains. He could lift rubble. He could not knit together shredded organs or restart a failing heart. Just like with Sir Night Eye, a venomous voice whispered in his mind. You were there. You were powerful. And you still couldn't save him. A wave of nausea rolled over him. He looked away from Stark's fading form, his gaze sweeping the battlefield in a desperate search for what? A solution? Hope? Instead, his eyes landed on Shigaraki. The villain wasn't engaged in any grand battle. He stood on a small rise, observing the carnage with the detached interest of a theater critic. He wasn't fighting for Thanos. He wasn't fighting against him. He was simply watching. Waiting. His scarred hand rose, fingers splayed, and he touched a fallen piece of Chitauri armor. It didn't erupt into dust. His quirk, still recovering from the damage of the war, was weak. But the look in his eyes, that was at full strength. It was a look of profound, covetous hunger. He wasn't seeing a battle for the fate of the universe. He was seeing the ultimate expression of his own ideology, destruction. Total, absolute, indiscriminate decay. A small, twisted smile played on his lips. It was a smile that said, "See? I was right all along. Everything falls apart. Everything turns to dust." Deku felt a surge of revulsion so pure and so potent it almost made him retch. They were fighting and dying to save a world that contained people like this. People who would dance on its ashes. People who saw suffering not as a tragedy, but as an art form. He fought to save everyone, but how could you save someone who didn't want to be saved? How could you save a world from people who wanted only to burn it? The cycle felt endless. Defeat one villain, and another rises. Stop one war, and a new one begins. The very potential for conflict, for malice, for decay, it was woven into the fabric of existence. And in that moment, staring at Shigaraki's serene, monstrous smile, a dangerous thought, a terrifying seed of an idea, began to sprout in the fertile ground of his trauma. What if you could stop the cycle itself? A scream, high-pitched and familiar, shattered his spiraling thoughts. It was Uraraka. He whipped his head around, his heart seizing in his chest. He saw her, not 50 yards away, her face pale with effort. A pile of rubble hovered above her, zero gravity holding tons of concrete and rebar aloft, shielding a group of injured Wakandan soldiers. But she was being swarmed. A Chitauri soldier, its reptilian face split in a parody of a grin, raised its energy lance. Its target was clear. Uraraka, her attention focused on maintaining her hold on the rubble, was completely exposed. Time seemed to warp, stretching into an agonizingly slow crawl. Deku saw the blue light gathering at the tip of the lance. He saw the strain on Uraraka's face, the sweat beading on her brow. He saw the exhausted forms of Ida and Ajri trying to fight their way to her, but they were too far, bogged down by their own fights. No. The word was a silent scream in his soul. Not her. He pushed off the ground, a 45% smash cracking the earth beneath his feet. Green lightning flared, and he felt the familiar strain in his bones, the protest of his muscles pushed to their limit. Black whip shot from his fingertips, a desperate, reaching tendril of darkness. Too far. He was too far away. The image of Sir Nitai's body, impaled and broken, flashed before his eyes. The feeling of his own powerlessness, a gaping wound that had never truly healed. The memory of Bakugo, bleeding out on the ground after taking a blow meant for him. The promise he had made to himself, over and over again. I will never let anyone I care about die again. The Chitauri fired. The world went white with energy. A thunderous, concussive blast ripped through the air, so loud it dwarfed every other sound on the battlefield. It wasn't the clean hum of the Chitauri weapon. It was raw, chaotic, and utterly furious. Daithai. When Deku's vision cleared, a figure stood between Uraraka and the now vaporized alien. Smoke billowed from his gauntlet hands. His blonde, spiky hair was stark against the smoky sky. Bakugo. He hadn't just blocked the shot. He had met it head-on with a full-power AP shot, overwhelming it and annihilating the soldier behind it. His back was to Uraraka, a living shield of explosive rage. He was breathing heavily, his shoulders heaving. Pay attention, round face. He snarled, not even turning to look at her. This ain't a training exercise. Uraraka stared at his back, her eyes wide with shock and terror, before a wave of nausea hit her. She released the rubble, which crashed harmlessly to the ground as the soldiers scrambled clear, and stumbled back, her quirk's backlash hitting her all at once. Bakugo didn't wait for a thank you. He was already moving, a whirlwind of explosions and curses, blasting his way through another wave of enemies. He was rage personified, a perfect, efficient engine of destruction. But he had been there. He had been fast enough. Deku landed softly a few feet away, his own momentum bleeding out into nothing. He looked from Uraraka's pale, trembling form to Bakugo's retreating, wrathful one. He should have felt relief. He should have felt gratitude. He felt nothing but a hollow, echoing terror. He had almost failed. Again. His power, his speed, his quirks, none of it had been enough. If Bakugo hadn't been there, if he had been a second slower, a foot further away, Uraraka would be dead. The image burned itself onto the inside of his eyelids, her smile, her bright, determined eyes gone forever. Replaced by a charred husk on a broken world. The dam of his composure, already cracked by the overwhelming scale of the battle, by the sight of his heroes falling, by the disgusting glee of his nemesis, finally burst. The weight of worlds he had tried to shoulder came crashing down, and something inside him, something fundamental to the hero Deku, broke. The whispers in his head were no longer just echoes of past failures. They were a chorus. You're not strong enough. You're not fast enough. You will always be too late. People will always get hurt. People will always die. Because you can't save everyone. His gaze, wild and desperate, darted across the battlefield. He saw chaos. He saw pain. He saw an endless, self-perpetuating cycle of violence. Heroes rising to meet villains. Armies rising to meet armies. A universe built on a foundation of conflict. And he, Izuku Midoriya, was just one small boy, running himself to pieces trying to patch a million holes in a sinking ship, armed with nothing but inherited power and a bleeding heart. His eyes landed on Thanos. The Titan had finally thrown Captain America aside. He was striding toward the center of the battlefield, toward a single point of cosmic focus. He pushed Thor away with a casual, contemptuous backhand. He ignored the hail of energy blasts and projectiles peppering his armor. His goal was clear. The nano gauntlet, the Avenger's own version of his ultimate weapon, lay half buried in the dirt, knocked from a hero's grasp. Thanos reached for it. And in that moment, Izuku Midoriya saw not a problem, but a solution. A terrible, final, absolute solution. The voices of the past one for all users, usually a source of comfort and guidance, now screamed in his mind. They weren't words, but raw feelings. Terror. Warning. A desperate, primal plea of no. That power is not for you. Nana Shimura's voice was a ghost of a whisper, filled with dread. It will break you, Ninth! It will break everything! The second user's voice was sharp, a shard of ice. All Might's vestige, a golden phantom of his prime, appeared at the edge of his consciousness. My boy, don't! This is a burden no hero should bear. Deku heard them. But he also heard Uraraka's scream. He saw Sir Nightie's blood. He saw Tony Stark's flickering arc reactor. He saw a universe locked in an eternal, agonizing war with itself. He looked at the gauntlet, at the 6 stones that governed the very laws of existence. The power to overcome any foe. The space to be anywhere, instantly. The time to undo any mistake. The soul to understand any being. The mind to end any conflict. The reality to build a better world. A world without pain. A world without villains. A world where no one had to be strong, because there was nothing left to fight. A world where a crying child would never be told he couldn't be a hero, because heroes would no longer be needed. It was a monstrous, arrogant, terrifying thought. And it was the most heroic idea he'd ever had. His body, his soul, his very being, screamed in protest. But the traumatized boy at the core of the hero had made a decision. He would not be too late. Not this time. Thanos' fingers were inches from the gauntlet. He was smiling, a look of inevitable triumph on his face. I am inevitable. No! Deku roared, the sound tearing from his throat, raw and broken. One for all. 100%. Pain, white-hot and absolute, erupted through his body. His limbs screamed. His bones groaned. The green lightning around him turned into a blinding, emerald inferno. This wasn't a controlled burst. This was a full, catastrophic release of every ounce of power he possessed. Delaware smash! He didn't punch. He flicked his fingers, unleashing a cyclone of pure force that tore the air apart. The shockwave wasn't aimed at Thanos, but at the ground beneath the gauntlet, blasting it into the air. Simultaneously, a dozen thick, powerful strands of black whip erupted from his back and arms. They were no longer precise tendrils. They were ravenous pythons of dark energy. They bypassed Thanos, ignoring the Titan completely, and converged on the spinning, airborne prize. They wrapped around the nano-gauntlet, hissing as they made contact with the cosmic energies. Thanos' eyes widened in momentary shock, his triumphant declaration dying on his lips. He reached, but he was a fraction of a second too slow. With a final, desperate scream that was equal parts effort and agony, Deku yanked. The gauntlet, trailing streams of black energy, flew through the air. It wasn't a calculated throw. It was a desperate magnetic pull. It sailed directly toward its new master, a moth drawn to a catastrophic flame. Deku raised his left arm, the arm that had been broken and healed more times than he could count. The arm that bore the scars of his entire heroic journey. The nano-gauntlet, humming with the power to unmake reality, slammed onto his forearm. The nanites instantly reconfigured, shrinking, tightening, molding themselves to his smaller frame with a series of sickening clicks and whirs. Then came the fire. It was a pain beyond anything he had ever imagined. It was worse than breaking all his limbs at once. It was the pain of 1,000 suns being born and dying in his veins. The raw, unfiltered energy of the 6 Infinity Stones flooded his system, a cosmic torrent that threatened to obliterate his very atoms. His hero costume began to smoke and char. His skin blackened and blistered up his arm, the flesh cracking under the strain. The power surged up his arm, into his shoulder, and straight into his soul. And it connected with One for All, the inherited quirk, a vessel of 8 souls, a torch passed through generations, met the ultimate power of the universe. The reaction was explosive. The voices of the vestiges were no longer whispers or warnings. They were a single, unified, mind-shattering scream of pure, undiluted terror that echoed in the deepest parts of his being. A chorus of ghosts witnessing the birth of a god from the ashes of a broken child. The fire in his arm was the first reality. It was a physical anchor in a universe that had just dissolved into screaming, incoherent data. The pain was a language he understood, a familiar companion from 100 broken bones. But it was swiftly being drowned out by something new, something infinitely more terrifying. It was not pain. It was everything. His consciousness, ripped from the battlefield, was plummeting through an abyss of pure information. He wasn't in his body anymore. He was his body, and his body was a single, overloaded nerve ending in the central nervous system of the cosmos. The 6 Infinity Stones were not just tools of power. They were keys, each one unlocking a door to a fundamental aspect of existence. And all 6 doors had just been kicked open into his mind. The Mind Stone unspooled the thoughts of every sentient being that had ever existed, a tidal wave of joy, sorrow, ambition, and despair. The Soul Stone showed him the ephemeral, glowing essence of every life, a galaxy of tiny stars, and made him feel the flicker of each one extinguishing. The Space Stone stretched his awareness across every point in the universe simultaneously, from the birth of a star in the Andromeda Galaxy to the fall of a single raindrop in a puddle in Musdalifah. The Time Stone fractured his perception, forcing him to experience every second of history and every possible future all at once. The Reality Stone showed him the base code of existence, the shimmering quantum threads from which all matter was woven. And the Power Stone was the engine driving this entire cataclysmic engine of revelation, force-feeding it all into the fragile vessel of a teenage boy's soul. His mindscape was not a quiet place of reflection. It was a maelstrom. He was kneeling, though there was no ground. He was on a precipice overlooking eternity. The sky above was a swirling vortex of nebulae and dying stars, and the ground beneath was a fractured mirror reflecting a billion different scenes at once. He saw the beach he had cleaned, the scrap metal now twisting into the shapes of Chidari soldiers. He saw the rooftop where All Might had told him he could be a hero, the cityscape behind it now the burning ruins of Xander. He saw his own bedroom, his All Might posters peeling off the walls to reveal the weeping faces of children from 1,000 different worlds. He was on his knees, head bowed, the non-existent ground beneath his fingers feeling like both shattered glass and soft earth. The nano gauntlet was still on his arm, not as a physical object, but as a brand on his very essence, a glowing circuit board of cosmic law fused to his spirit. Then, the storm of raw data began to coalesce. It focused. It took on a narrative, a purpose. The stones were not just showing him random information, they were answering the silent, screaming question in his heart. The question that had driven him to seize this impossible power in the first place. Is it worth it? Is all this fighting, all this pain worth it? The universe, in its infinite and cruel wisdom, decided to show him. The first vision was a victory. It slammed into his consciousness with the force of a physical blow. He saw Tony Stark, his face grim and resolute, wrestling the stones from Thanos. He heard the fateful words, "And I am Iron Man." He felt the snap, a wave of cleansing energy that turned Thanos and his entire army to dust. He saw the aftermath, the quiet relief, the dawning horror. He was at Tony Stark's funeral, a silent observer standing beside a grieving Pepper Potts and a heartbroken Peter Parker. He saw the heroes, victorious but hollowed out, Captain America, aged and weary, finally at rest but haunted by the friends he couldn't save. Thor, trying to find his place in a universe that had taken everything from him. The world was safe, the universe was saved, but the price was etched onto the faces of every survivor. The victory was a scar, not a celebration. The vision pulled back, accelerating through time. He saw the memorials built, he saw the decades of peace. But he also saw the lingering trauma, the nightmares, the ghosts that walked beside the living. Even in victory, suffering remained. The pain didn't end, it just changed its shape. This is your best-case scenario, a cold, dispassionate voice that was both his and not his whispered in the storm. Victory. And it is still soaked in loss. Then the vision shifted, twisting into something far darker. It showed him the alternative. A future where he hadn't interfered. He saw Thanos retrieve the gauntlet. He saw the Titan's smug, satisfied grin as he raised his hand. He heard the snap. And then he watched his world die. He saw Uraraka, her face a mask of confusion, her hand outstretched towards him. Then her fingers began to flake away, turning into fine, brown dust that scattered in the wind. He heard her whisper his name, Deku, a puff of sound from a disintegrating form. He saw Ada, chopping his hand in a final, defiant gesture before his legs crumbled, his engine calves falling silent forever. He saw Todoroki, his left side erupting in a final, desperate flare of fire as his right side turned to ice and then shattered into a million glittering shards of frozen dust. He saw them all. Kirishima, his hardened form cracking and disintegrating. Azuri, her long tongue turning to ash mid-flick. Momo, her hands glowing with creation as she herself was uncreated. He watched half of Class 1A, half of the pro-heroes, half of the Avengers, half of everyone, vanish into nothingness. The silence that followed was more horrifying than any scream. He was forced to feel the grief of the survivors. He felt Bakugo's silent, uncomprehending rage as he stared at the empty space where Kirishima had been. He felt All Might's hollow despair, a man who had outlived yet another generation of hope. The vision faded, leaving him trembling in the chaotic mindscape, the phantom grief of a world he just saved clinging to him like a shroud. He had prevented that. He had done the right thing, but the stones were not finished. They were just getting started. You stopped one man, the voice returned, colder now, more insistent. You stopped one apocalypse. But Thanos is not the end. He is a single sentence in an infinite book of pain. The fractured mirror beneath him swirled, and new images rose up, pulling him in. He was no longer an observer. He was a participant. He was standing in a sterile, white room. A tall, impossibly thin man with a clock for a face, Sir Night-Eye, was lying in a bed. The memory was so vivid he could smell the antiseptic. He saw his own younger self, weeping. He saw Mirio's face, a perfect, heartbreaking sculpture of agony. He felt Sir Night-Eye's hand on his cheek, the touch faint and cool. He heard the final prophecy, "You will continue to light up the world with your smile." But this time, the memory didn't end there. The soul stone ripped away the veil. He felt Night-Eye's final thoughts. Not just acceptance, but a deep, profound regret. A vision of the future he had foreseen for All Might played out in Deku's mind, a brutal, lonely death in a battle against a foe he could not defeat. Night-Eye hadn't just died. He had died knowing he had failed to prevent a greater tragedy. His quirk showed him the future, the Mind Stone whispered, its logic inescapable. His power was to see suffering and be unable to stop it. A curse, was it not? The very thing that made him a hero was also his personal hell. The scene dissolved. He was now a small child, no older than 5, in a dimly lit home. His hands were itching. An unbearable, maddening itch, deep under his skin. He was crying, begging his father to make it stop. But his father just looked at him with fear. The itch grew, and a strange, terrifying power built in his fingertips. He reached for his dog, Monk, just wanting a comforting touch, and the dog crumbled into a cloud of gray dust. The horror, the confusion, the self-loathing, it wasn't an observation. It was his. He was Tenko's Shimura. He felt his quirk, decay, manifest not as a power, but as a disease, a parasitic horror that destroyed everything he loved. He felt the accidental touch that killed his sister, his mother, his grandparents. He felt the final, terrifying confrontation with his abusive father, the one person whose death brought a sick, momentary relief that immediately curdled into soul-crushing guilt. He felt himself wandering the streets, alone, invisible, a ghost ignored by the very heroes who were supposed to save everyone. And then he felt a hand on his shoulder. A kind voice. The voice of All for One. A promise not of salvation, but of purpose. A voice that told him his pain was not his fault, that the world was broken, that his destructive nature was something to be embraced. Izuku was wrenched from the memory, gasping for a breath he didn't need. He saw Shigaraki not as the villain who had tried to kill him, but as a terrified, crying child whom society had utterly failed. A boy whose quirk had made him a monster before he ever had a choice. The visions kept coming, a relentless barrage of curated misery. He was a young girl, Toga Himiko, in a prim school uniform. He felt the overwhelming, ecstatic urge to drink the blood of a small bird, to become it, to understand it. He felt the disgust and fear from his parents, who forced him to wear a mask of normalcy over his true nature until the mask cracked and shattered, leaving only a broken, smiling girl who found love only in violence and blood. He was a man named Jean Babaigawara, creating a clone of himself for companionship, only to watch that clone argue that it was the original. He felt the terror of creating an army of himself, the ensuing battle royale that left only one survivor, a man so traumatized he could no longer tell what was real, his mind fractured into a million pieces by the very power that was supposed to end his loneliness. Toga. Twice. Shigaraki. They weren't just villains. They were people whose quirks, whose very essence, had led them to ruin. They were tragic figures broken by the same system of powers that had created heroes like him. The line between a good quirk and a bad quirk seemed suddenly, horrifyingly arbitrary. The torrent of pain was becoming unbearable. He wanted it to stop. He wanted to shut his eyes, but he had no eyes. He wanted to cover his ears, but the screams were inside his own soul. And then, the stones showed him her, Eri. He saw her tiny form, strapped to a chair in a dark laboratory. He felt the needles in her arm, the agonizing process of her quirk being weaponized, her body being rewound and disassembled over and over. He felt her terror, her belief that she was cursed, that her touch brought only pain. He saw the kindness of Mirio and himself, a brief candle of hope in her dark world. But the vision didn't stop there. The time stone spun forward. It showed him a possible future. An accident during a training exercise at Eri, now a young teenager, loses control of her power for a split second. A classmate is rewound out of existence. He saw the look on her face, the same terrified, self-hating look she wore in Overhaul's lab. He saw her ostracized, feared. He saw villains trying to capture her again, to turn her miracle quirk into a weapon of mass destruction. He saw that her suffering, like the universe's, was a cycle, destined to repeat. His resolve, his sanity, everything was fraying. The sheer, concentrated misery of the universe was too much. The weight of worlds was crushing him into dust. To break him completely, the stones delivered their two final, most personal blows. He saw a future battle. A new villain, more powerful than All for One. He was fighting, his power greater than ever before. But he was faltering. An attack, a beam of dark energy, was headed straight for him. And just like in the Paranormal Liberation War, Bakugo moved. A blur of orange and black. This time, there was no near miss. No wound he could survive. Deku watched, his own eyes reflected in the vision, as the beam impaled Bakugo through the chest. He saw the light leave his childhood friend's crimson eyes, a final, choked curse dying on his lips. He felt his own scream of denial, a sound that was ripped from the deepest part of his soul. The vision dissolved, only to be replaced by a quiet, sterile hospital room. All Might, old and skeletal, lay under a white sheet. The embers of One for All were long gone. He was just Toshinori Yagi now, a frail old man succumbing to his ancient injuries. He was alone. Deku, in this future, was away on some mission, saving a city, oblivious. He watched as the heart monitor beside the bed flatlined, its single, monotonous beep a death knell for the symbol of peace. All Might died not in a blaze of glory, but with a quiet, lonely sigh. No! The scream was real this time, a roar of pure agony that momentarily pushed back the storm of visions. He was on his knees, clutching his head, his spiritual form flickering violently. Enough! Please! Make it stop! He sobbed, and in the brief silence his scream had carved out, other voices emerged. They were faint at first, like distant whispers in the cosmic wind, but they were familiar. They were voices of light, flickering into existence around him, like constellations taking shape, were the vestiges of One for All. They were not solid, but composed of the same shimmering, quantum energy as the mindscape, their forms barely holding together against the onslaught of the Infinity Stones. Yoichi, the first, his face pale and drawn, looked at the gauntlet on Izuku's arm with pure terror. Ninth, you must take it off. That power, it was not meant for mortal hands. It will consume you. He's right, the second user, a man with spiky hair and a grim expression, added, his form wavering. You think you can control the universe? The universe is controlling you. It's showing you only the worst of itself to break you. Nana Shimura, her dark hair flowing around her like captured starlight, floated closer. Her face was a mask of desperate maternal fear. Izuku, listen to me. Pain is part of life. Loss is part of it. We don't run from it. We don't try to erase it. We fight to make things better in spite of it. That is what being a hero means. Don't let their suffering become an excuse to give up the fight. She gestured to the swirling visions of Shigaraki and Toga. Their tragedies are not a reason to erase choice, but a reason to build a world with better ones. But their words were like trying to shout over a hurricane. The visions still echoed in his mind. Uraraka turning to dust. Bakugo impaled. All Might dying alone. The crying face of Tenko Shimura. You don't understand, Izuku whispered, his voice hoarse. I saw it. I saw everything. It never stops. The fighting, the dying, the crying, it never ever stops. We win, and people still hurt. We lose, and people turn to dust. We build, and someone else comes to tear it all down. It's a broken system. The whole universe is broken. A golden light, brighter and more solid than the others, pulsed beside him. It was All Might's vestige, a phantom of his prime, his iconic hair horns sharp against the cosmic chaos. He placed a translucent, golden hand on Izuku's shoulder. The touch was cool, but it was grounding. My boy, All Might's voice was deep, resonant, and filled with a profound sorrow. He wasn't yelling. He was pleading. Listen to me, Izuku. I know you are in pain. I know what you are seeing, but what you are contemplating is not heroism. It is tyranny. It is fear. He knelt, bringing his golden face level with Izuku's. When I found you, you were a boy with nothing but a dream. You ran into danger to save young Bakugo when you had no power at all. Why? Because it was the right thing to do. Because your heart moved before you could think. That is a hero. A hero doesn't seek to control the world. A hero inspires it. He looked at the gauntlet, his spectral form seeming to shrink from its power. This is a power no man should wield, Izuku. It offers the illusion of a perfect solution, but perfection is a cage. To take away struggle is to take away strength. To take away pain is to take away joy. Please, my boy. For your own soul. Take it off. For a long moment, Izuku was silent. All Might's words were a lifeline, a familiar beacon in the storm. He looked at his mentor's face, the face that had inspired him his entire life. He saw the logic in his words. He felt the truth in them, but then he saw Bakugo's dead eyes. He saw Uraraka's ashes scattering in the wind. He felt the itch on Tenko Shimura's small hands. The logic of a hero, of inspiring hope and fighting the good fight, seemed so small, so hopelessly inadequate compared to the infinite, crushing scale of the problem. Patching holes in a ship that was already at the bottom of the ocean, he slowly raised his head. The tears that streamed down his face were real, tracking paths through the metaphysical grime on his soul. His eyes, once bright green pools of determination, now glowed with the terrifying, multi-hued light of the 6 Infinity Stones. His voice, when he spoke, was not the voice of a hero. It was the voice of a martyr, a judge, and a broken child, all at once. It was quiet, steady, and utterly defeated. But you told me I could be a hero, All Might. All Might's golden form flickered. And you are. You are the greatest of them all. No, Izuku said, a hollow finality in his tone. A hero saves people. That's the job. But I keep failing. I was too late for Sir Night Eye. I was almost too late for Uraraka. I watched you waste away. I saw Kaken die. In every future, every timeline, every possibility, we fail. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but eventually. We fail because we can't be everywhere. We fail because people have the capacity to hate, to hurt, to destroy. We fail because the universe is designed to allow for failure. He looked past All Might's horrified visage, his gaze fixed on the infinite tapestry of suffering that the stones had shown him. What if I could change the design? He whispered. A hero saves people. What if I could save everyone? Not just from Thanos. Not just from villains. From everything. From quirks that twist you into a monster. From ambition that leads to war. From the very pain of loss itself. He rose to his feet, a small, trembling figure now radiating an aura of absolute, terrifying power. The vestiges recoiled, their light dimming in his presence. Izuku, no! Nana Shimura cried out, her voice filled with anguish. This is not salvation. It's annihilation of the soul. Don't do it, kid! The second user roared. This is a mistake you can't undo. Izuku looked at his own hand, the gauntlet hand, glowing with cosmic fire. He saw the power to rewrite reality, to fix the fundamental flaw of existence. He saw the end of all suffering. He saw a universe where a boy like Tenko Shimura would get the help he needed, where a girl like Toga would be understood, where Eri would never cry again, where Bakugo and All Might and Uraraka would live long, peaceful, painless lives. It was a beautiful, tranquil, perfect cage. And he, the hero who wanted to save everyone, would be its architect and its jailer. He ignored the screaming pleas of the vestiges, the voices of the heroes who had come before him. Their way had been tried for generations. It had led to this. To an endless cycle of blood and tears. It was time for a new way. He lifted his head, tears streaming down his face, his eyes now blazing furnaces of cosmic light. The universe held its breath. He brought his thumb and middle finger together. The sound of the metal pieces clicking into place was a death knell for free will. His wish was not for death. It was not for destruction. It was an act of the ultimate, most misguided, and absolute compassion. He looked at the phantom of All Might, his mentor, his father figure, and gave him a watery, tragic smile. He whispered the deepest, truest desire of his broken, heroic heart. I just want the hurting to stop. And he snapped his fingers. There was no explosion. No shockwave. No cataclysmic roar. There was only a sound. A single, pure, crystalline chime that echoed through the mindscape and across the entirety of reality. And then, the universe went silent, and everything turned to a brilliant, placid, and horrifying white. The white was absolute. It was not a color, but the absence of it, a total and complete sensory deprivation that erased sound, sight, and feeling. For a moment that stretched into a terrifying eternity, the universe was a blank page. Then, as gently as a sunrise, the light receded. The first thing that registered was the silence. It was a physical presence, a heavy blanket laid over the world. The symphony of chaos, the shrieking metal, the roaring beasts, the crackle of energy, the screams of the dying, was gone. In its place was a quiet so profound it felt louder than the war that had preceded it. On the churned earth battlefield, Tony Stark gasped, his body jolting. The arc reactor in his chest, which had been sputtering like a dying candle, now shone with a steady, brilliant blue light. He sat up, his hands flying to his torso, where moments before there had been a gaping, smoking wound in his nanite armor. There was nothing. The suit was pristine, the red and gold plating seamless and unblemished, as if it had just been deployed. He looked at his hands, then at the sky, his brilliant mind utterly failing to process the data. Nearby, Captain America pushed himself to his feet. His uniform was clean, the dirt and blood gone. He looked down at his shield, which he had watched Thanos brutalize into a fractured ruin. It was whole. The vibrant red, white, and blue were unmarred, the star in its center gleaming under a sky that was now a soft, gentle blue, devoid of alien warships. The battlefield itself was healing. Craters filled with impossible speed, the dark earth smoothing over as if sculpted by an unseen hand. The fires that had raged across the ruins of the Avengers compound extinguished themselves, not with a sizzle, but by simply winking out of existence. Twisted metal and shattered concrete flowed like liquid, reforming into their original structures, pristine and untouched. And Thanos and his entire apocalyptic horde were gone. They hadn't turned to dust. There was no dramatic disintegration. One moment, the field was teeming with billions of Chitauri, Outriders, and Sakarans. The next, they were simply not there, as if a switch had been flipped, erasing them from the equation. It was not a violent end, but a quiet, sterile removal. A correction. For a long moment, the assembled heroes and warriors from a dozen worlds simply stood, caught in a state of collective shock. Injuries were gone. Exhaustion had vanished. The world was whole. It was a miracle, a prayer answered in the most absolute way imaginable. He did it, a sorcerer from Kamartaj whispered, his voice filled with awe. The kid did it. All eyes turned to the center of it all, to the spot where the small, green-clad hero had stood. But Izuku Midoriya was gone. The only thing left was the nano-gauntlet, lying on the now unbroken ground, inert and smoking faintly. It was Bakugo who broke the spell of silent awe. His rage, a constant furnace in his chest, had been momentarily banked by the sheer impossibility of what had happened. But now, it roared back to life, fueled by confusion and a deep, instinctual wrongness. He saw the empty space where Deku had been, and his mind made the only connection it could. DKU. He meant for it to be a roar, a ground-shaking explosion of a word that would demand an answer from the heavens themselves. He put every ounce of his fury into it, his vocal cords tensing, his lungs burning. The sound that came out was calm. Midoriya? The voice was his own, yet it was alien. It was measured, inquisitive, utterly devoid of the furious, ragged edge that defined him. It was as if another person were speaking through his mouth, a polite stranger wearing his face. The dissonance was so jarring it made him stumble. He tried again, forcing the sound from his diaphragm. "You damn nerd, where are you?" Again, the result was the same quiet, almost gentle query. "Izuku, where are you?" Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through his confusion. This was wrong. This was deeply, fundamentally wrong. His anger was still there, a boiling caldera in his soul, but he couldn't express it. It was trapped, a caged animal clawing at the bars of a tranquil prison. Fine. If he couldn't scream, he would show him. He would level this whole damn compound with a single, rage-fueled explosion that would get the nerd's attention wherever he was hiding. He thrust his palms forward, the familiar posture as natural as breathing. He braced for the recoil, for the familiar crackle of ignited sweat, for the scent of caramel and ozone, for the glorious, cathartic blast. Nothing. He stared at his hands. They were sweating, yes. But it was just sweat. Salty water. There was no telltale viscosity, no faint, sweet smell of nitroglycerin. He tried again, focusing, channeling the inferno of his rage into his palms. Nothing. Just the unnatural silence, and the cool breeze on his damp skin. The panic blossomed into full-blown terror. He was trapped. He was screaming on the inside, a silent, primal roar of frustration and fear, but his body would not obey. His primary form of expression, his power, his very identity, was gone. He looked down at his hands, no longer seeing weapons of victory, but useless, impotent flesh. He felt like a prisoner, in his own skin. A ripple of confusion was spreading through the crowd. Shoto Todoroki stood, his expression a mask of stoic focus. He felt the wrongness, the placid air. He extended his right hand, reaching for the familiar, comforting chill of his ice. He tried to summon a simple shard, a small glacier, anything. His hand remained temperate. No frost bloomed on his knuckles. No cold energy gathered. He switched, extending his left hand, trying to call upon the raging fire he had finally accepted as his own. He felt for the heat, the connection to his father's power. There was only a faint, human warmth. The two halves of his being, the warring elements that defined his entire existence, were gone. He was left in a bland, neutral middle. He looked at his hands, then up at the sky, his mismatched eyes wide with a dawning horror that shattered his usual composure. A few yards away, Achiko Uraraka, her earlier nausea gone, knelt down. The terror of her near-death experience was a phantom memory, but the instinct to test, to confirm, was overwhelming. She placed her 5 fingertips on a loose rock, the size of a fist. She focused on the familiar feeling, the mental command to negate its gravity. Float. The rock remained stubbornly on the ground. She tried again, pushing with her will, her brow furrowed in concentration. The rock didn't even tremble. The very thing that gave her purpose, her dream of helping her parents, her method of being a hero, it was locked away. She stared at her pink-tipped fingers as if they belonged to a stranger. A deep, inexplicable sadness began to well up inside her, a grief for a loss she couldn't yet name. The scene repeated itself across the field, a silent, creeping plague of normalcy. Peter Parker, his mask dangling from his hand, tried to leap onto a wall of the rebuilt compound. His feet hit the surface and promptly slid down, leaving him in an undignified heap on the ground. He pressed his palm against the wall. It didn't stick. Carol Danvers, Captain Marvel, looked at her hands. The cosmic glow, the brilliant, star-born energy that usually wreathed her, was absent. She felt solid, grounded, mortal. The power that flowed through her veins like a second circulatory system was simply gone. Everywhere, the realization dawned. The Asgardian soldiers found their strength reduced to that of a strong human. The sorcerers of Kamartaj gestured, tracing mandalas in the air, but no golden sparks flew from their fingers. The Wakandans in their panther habit suits found the vibranium unresponsive, their enhanced strength and speed vanished. They had been saved. And in the process they had been stripped bare. The most unsettling transformations, however, were happening among the villains who had been pulled into the fray. Shigaraki Tamura stood motionless, his eyes fixed on his own hands. For his entire life, his hands had been his curse. They were instruments of uncontrollable destruction, conduits for a maddening, relentless itch that demanded to be scratched on the canvas of the world. His desire to decay, to destroy, was not just an ideology. It was a physical, all-consuming need. Now it was gone. He ran a finger along the palm of his other hand. He felt only skin. There was no itch. No simmering, destructive energy waiting to be unleashed. He looked at the pristine, rebuilt world around him, and he felt no rage. No hatred. No desire to see it all crumble to dust. He felt nothing. It was a profound and terrifying emptiness. He looked at the face of a nearby hero, not with the intent to murder, but with a vacant, childlike confusion. The complex architecture of trauma, rage, and ideology that had been painstakingly built around the core of Tenko Shimura had been demolished, leaving only the confused, lost boy standing in the ruins. His entire reason for being had been surgically removed. Toga Himiko, who had been fighting near Dabi, tilted her head. Her gaze fell upon Uraraka. A flicker of something registered in her mind, a recognition, a connection. A moment ago, that connection would have manifested as a manic, bloodthirsty grin, a desire to cut, to taste, to become the object of her affection. Her hand would have tightened on her knife. Now, her expression remained placid. The wires in her brain that connected love to violence had been severed. The manic obsession was replaced by a simple, detached curiosity. She saw a girl with brown hair and rosy cheeks. The intensity that defined her, the core of her twisted persona, was gone. She looked less like a serial killer and more like a tourist observing local wildlife, a faint, empty smile on her lips that held none of its previous menace. Dabi stood beside her, his arms limp at his sides. The blue flames that were a constant, self-immolating pyre around him were gone. He touched the staples holding his charred flesh together. For the first time in years he felt no pain. The burning, all-consuming hatred for his father, the fire that had been his fuel and his identity, was extinguished. He looked over at Endeavor, who was staring at his own powerless hands in disbelief. Dabi felt no anger. No need for revenge. He just saw a man with white hair. The grand, tragic purpose of his entire existence had evaporated, leaving him hollow and aimless. Izuku Midoriya had not killed his enemies. He had healed them. He had cured them of their malice, their trauma, their very nature, by performing a spiritual lobotomy on a universal scale. While the masses were lost in their quiet confusion, four figures stood apart, shielded from the change by fortune, by nature, or by power beyond the snap's intended scope. And they understood. Dr. Stephen Strange stood with his hands tucked into his robes, the eye of Agamotto cool against his chest. When the white light had washed over reality, he had felt it as a wave of pure, benevolent intent. The eye, a vessel containing the time stone's echo, had protected his mind, allowing him to witness the process not as a victim, but as an observer. He felt the universe being rewritten. He felt the fundamental laws of cause and effect being bent. He felt the concepts of quirk, superpower, cosmic entity, and even violent ambition being isolated and gently, horrifyingly, excised from the tapestry of reality. He looked at the peaceful, confused crowd. "Oh, you foolish, heroic boy," he murmured, his voice tight with a cold, intellectual dread. "What have you done?" Thor Odinson stood tall, Stormbreaker still in his grip. The snap had washed over him, a strange, calming wave that felt deeply unnatural. He felt a slight dimming of his own power, the divine lightning that was his birthright now harder to call, quieter. But his nature as a 1,000-year-old god, a being from another realm, had insulated him from the worst of it. His memories were intact. His will was his own, and his will was turning to pure, unadulterated fury. "This is not peace," he growled, his voice a low thunder that was a stark contrast to the silence. "This is a cage." He has turned the universe into a neatly ordered prison. He looked at the faces of his fellow Avengers, at the blank confusion where fiery determination used to be. He has stolen their souls. Captain America felt the change as a profound quiet in his own blood. The super soldier serum was a part of his biology, not an energy he wielded, so his strength and speed remained. But he felt the absence of something else. The aggressive edge, the soldier's instinct, the part of him that was always ready for a fight, was muted. It was still there, but buried under a new layer of profound calm. It felt wrong. His entire life had been a struggle, a fight for what was right against impossible odds. This was an imposed peace, a victory without a fight. And Steve Rogers knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that a victory no one has to fight for is not a victory at all. It's a surrender. His eyes found the fourth unaffected man, and his heart ached for him. Toshinori Yagi stood in his skeletal form, the wind gently blowing his oversized, now clean t-shirt. He had felt the snap as a final, gentle snuffing of a candle. The last, dying embers of One for All, the connection he shared with his boy, had simply gone out. It wasn't painful. It was just an ending, but his mind, his memories, his love for the boy he had chosen as his successor, they remained, a burning, terrible monument in the hollow space the power had left behind. He looked at the vacant faces of young Bakugo, young Todoroki, and all the others. He saw their strength, their fire, their very identities stolen away. And he looked at the empty spot on the ground where the gauntlet lay, and he saw his boy. Not a god. Not a savior. He saw Izuka Midoriya, a child who had felt the weight of the world on his shoulders, a child who had always tried too hard, a child who had wanted so desperately to save everyone that he had broken under the strain. A single tear traced a path down his gaunt face. He had failed him. He had given him a power too great to bear, a dream too heavy to carry, and he had not been there to stop him from making this terrible, ultimate mistake. "He didn't kill anyone," Strange said, his voice drawing the attention of the other three. They instinctively gathered, a small island of awareness in a sea of placid confusion. Thanos' plan was simple, brutal. A Malthusian solution to a cosmic problem. This, he gestured to the quiet world. This is infinitely more complex. And infinitely more horrifying. "What did he do?" Steve Rogers asked, his voice low and grim. "He made a wish," Strange explained, his eyes distant, as if he were reading lines of code in the air. "A wish born from his own trauma, from the pain he's clearly endured. He didn't wish for half of all life to be gone. He wished for the hurting to stop. All of it." Thor's eyes widened in dawning comprehension. "He took away their power. More than that," Strange corrected. "He targeted the very source of conflict, as he perceived it. Quirks. The super soldier serum's aggressive components. Gamma radiation's rage. Asgardian divinity, the X-gene. The cosmic energies that create beings like Captain Marvel. He didn't destroy them. He isolated and suppressed them on a conceptual level. He's turned them all back into baseline mortals." He looked over at Shigaraki, who was now sitting on the ground, tracing patterns in the dirt with a stick. And he didn't stop there. He targeted the mind. He removed the psychological drivers of conflict, violent ambition, deep-seated hatred, trauma-induced psychopathy, even the capacity for extreme rage. He glanced pointedly at Bakugo, who was now just standing, staring blankly at his hands, the internal storm in his eyes replaced by a bewildering calm. "He has cured the universe of everything that makes it chaotic, passionate, and free." Toshinori Yagi finally spoke, his voice cracking with grief. "He saved them." The other three looked at him. "That's what he thinks he did," Toshinori whispered, his gaze fixed on the spot where Deku vanished. In his mind, this was the ultimate act of heroism. A world where no one has to suffer. A world where no one has to die in a pointless battle. A world where heroes are no longer needed. He clenched his fists, his knuckles white. "He has created a paradise, and in doing so, damned us all. The quiet of the world pressed in on them. They looked out at the sea of faces, heroes and villains, side by side, no longer defined by their choices or their powers, but by their shared, placid emptiness. They were safe. They were healed. They were peaceful, and they were no longer themselves. They had been saved from the storm by being locked in a sterile, white room. Izuku Midoriya, in his desperate, compassionate, and broken heart, had not committed a universal genocide. He had committed a universal theft, stealing the very essence of what it meant to struggle, to strive, to choose, and to be. The quiet world was not a gift. It was a tomb. And they, the last few who remembered what had been lost, were its first conscious inmates. The planet had no name, for there was no one left to name it but him, and he had simply chosen to call it home. In the language of his new, universal consciousness, it was a concept more than a place, sanctuary. But in the quiet moments, when the ghost of his old self surfaced, he thought of it by a name he plucked from an old world language, Viridia. The Green Place. It was a world born from a god's imagination, and that god had been a boy who loved nature. The grass was a shade of emerald so vibrant it seemed to hum with life. The sky was a perpetual, cloudless azure, home to two suns, one a brilliant gold, the other a soft, silver white, that bathed the landscape in an eternal, gentle dawn. A light breeze, always warm and carrying the scent of flowers that bloomed in impossible colors, rustled the leaves of trees with silver bark and amethyst leaves. There was no harsh weather, no dangerous wildlife, no struggle for survival. It was a perfect, living paradise. On the slope of a gentle hill overlooking a crystal-clear lake, sat a small house. It was a simple, two-story dwelling, painfully, precisely familiar. It was a perfect replica of his childhood home in Mizudafu, from the slight scuff on the welcome mat to the precise arrangement of the potted plants on the porch. It was a memory made manifest, a desperate anchor in the shoreless ocean of his new existence. Sometimes, if he focused, he could almost smell his mother's katsudon drifting from the kitchen, a phantom scent from a life he had sacrificed. On the porch, in a simple wooden rocking chair, sat Izuku Midoriya. He was no longer clad in his battered hero costume. He wore a simple white shirt and comfortable dark pants, the clothes of a boy at rest. His once wild green-black hair was calmer, neatly framing a face that had lost its youthful eagerness. He looked serene, placid, his expression one of deep, abiding calm. But his eyes, still a brilliant green, held a profound and ancient loneliness, the look of a lighthouse keeper on a shore that would never again see a ship. His left arm, resting on the arm of the chair, bore the only scar in this perfect world. From his fingertips to his shoulder, his skin was a road map of his apotheosis. It was not the raw, blistered ruin it had been in the moments after the snap. It had healed, but the power had left its mark. Faint, silvery lines, like Lichtenberg figures, branched across his skin, glowing with a soft, internal light when his thoughts grew deep. They looked less like scars and more like constellations woven into his flesh, a permanent testament to the universal laws he had broken and rewritten. He was not idle. Before him, arranged in a semicircle on the porch floor, were 3 pools of what looked like liquid starlight. They were his windows, his terminals, his cosmic scrying pools. They swirled with the light of distant galaxies, but at his slightest whim, they would focus, displaying any time, any place, any person in the vast, quiet universe he now curated. He was the sole observer of his own masterpiece. A faint sigh escaped his lips, a sound that was immediately swallowed by the gentle hum of his perfect world. He leaned forward, his gaze fixed on the central pool. It was time to check on his work. It was always time. His motivation, his singular, driving purpose, replayed in his mind not as a memory, but as a core principle of his new being. I just wanted the hurting to stop. He hadn't been a conqueror seizing a throne. He had been a doctor, faced with a patient whose every cell was riddled with an incurable, agonizing disease called conflict. His solution had not been to treat the symptoms, the wars, the villains, the crime. His solution was to rewrite the patient's DNA. He had started with the most obvious vector of the disease quirks. In his omniscient sight, he saw them for what they truly were. Not gifts, not the next stage of human evolution, but a chaotic, unpredictable genetic lottery. For every person who could float, there was another whose body was made of rock, unable to feel a gentle touch. For every person who could create, there was another who could only destroy. Quirks created an immediate, unavoidable hierarchy of power. They bred jealousy, arrogance, and fear. They were the engine of the hero-villain cycle, a system that demanded a constant tribute of blood and sacrifice. So, he had performed a universal gene therapy. He hadn't destroyed quirks. He had simply switched them off, rendering the quirk factor in every being dormant, like an appendix, a vestigial remnant of a more savage age. The potential was still there, a silent line of code in their DNA, but it could no longer be expressed. He had liberated them from the tyranny of their own biology. He had made them all equal. All human. The pool before him shimmered, and he focused his intent. He watched a classroom in a Japanese high school. A history lesson. The teacher spoke of the age of quirks as a period of great upheaval and societal chaos, a dark age of individualism that preceded the current era of global unity, which historians were calling the Great Quiet. The students listened with detached, academic interest, the way his own generation had learned about the Sengoku period. To them, the idea of a person shooting fire from their hands was as alien as a samurai wielding a katana. It was just a story. A myth. A faint, sad smile touched Izuku's lips. It's better this way, he affirmed to himself. No more children developing powers that hurt them. No more quirk-based discrimination. No more Shigarakis. His thoughts shifted, and the logic of his grand procedure continued to unspool. The problem wasn't limited to quirks. The universe was filled with similar anomalies. He had seen the pain of Bruce Banner, a brilliant mind trapped in a constant war with a raging, green monster born of a gamma radiation accident. The Hulk was a being of pure, uncontrollable rage, a source of immense destruction. A tragedy. So, Izuku had reached into Banner's very cells and neutralized the gamma mutation. He hadn't killed the Hulk. He had cured the disease. He had given Dr. Banner the one thing he always wanted: quiet. Peace. A life where he never had to be afraid of the other guy ever again. He had seen the super soldier serum in Steve Rogers. It had made him a paragon of human potential, yes, but it had also been designed for war. It sharpened his senses, his strength, and his aggression. It locked him into the mindset of a soldier, always searching for a battle to fight. Izuku had seen the weariness in his eyes on that battlefield, so he had gently tweaked the formula's expression in Steve's blood. He left the strength, the vitality, those were beneficial, but he smoothed over the aggressive imperatives, the parts of the serum that screamed fight. He had eased his burden. He had allowed the soldier to finally stand at ease. He had looked upon the Asgardians and other godlike beings. He saw their immense power, their divinity, as a source of cosmic imbalance. They moved among mortals like giants among ants, their conflicts and politics spilling over and causing untold devastation on worlds that had no defense against them. Their very existence created a power dynamic that was inherently unjust. So, he had performed a great humbling. He didn't kill them. He simply grounded them. He snipped the celestial wires that granted them their godhood. They retained their long lives, their wisdom, but their power was reduced to a mortal scale. Thor was no longer a god of thunder. He was a strong, noble man. They were no longer gods to be worshipped or feared. They were simply an elder race, part of the great, quiet family of the cosmos. This was his philosophy. He was not a tyrant. He was a gardener. The universe was his garden, and it had been overrun with weeds of chaotic power, of extreme emotion, of ambition that grew so tall it blotted out the sun for everyone else. He had simply, painstakingly, pulled them all. He had pruned the branches that led to pain. He was the architect of a universal peace, built not on laws or treaties, but on the removal of the very capacity for war. It was a perfect, benevolent, and absolute system, and he was its sole, lonely guardian. His attention drifted to one of the pools on his right. He focused it on Earth, on the world he had given up. He braced himself, as he always did. This was the hardest part of his daily ritual, seeing the proof of his success and feeling the terrible, silent cost. The pool swirled, showing him a news broadcast from a global network. The anchor, a woman with a calm, pleasant voice, was reporting on the day's events. A global consortium had successfully reversed desertification in the Sahara using a newly developed atmospheric moisture trap. There were no political squabbles over resources, no corporate interests hijacking the technology. It was a united human effort for the betterment of all. The next story was about the final decommissioning of the world's last nuclear weapon. The anchor smiled, a placid, gentle expression. And so, humanity closes the book on the age of self-destruction, moving forward into a future of guaranteed peace. There was no crime. With the removal of extreme ambition, greed, and aggression, the very motivations for theft, violence, and murder had withered away. There were no more wars. Nations cooperated with a quiet, logical efficiency. The world was calm, stable, safe, perfect. To test his work, to truly see its effects, he sought out the ones who had been the most broken. He focused the pool, his thoughts a whisper that sent ripples across space and time. "Show me Tenko Shimura," the image resolved. He saw a man in his late 20s, his hair a shock of white, wearing a simple work apron. He was in a quiet, sunlit studio, surrounded by canvases in various states of repair. It was an art restoration workshop. Tenko Shimura, the man who would have been the symbol of fear, was meticulously applying a tiny dab of paint to a crack in a 17th century oil painting. His hands, the hands that had once brought decay to everything they touched, were now instruments of preservation. They were steady, precise, and gentle. His boss, an elderly woman, came over and peered at his work through her spectacles. "Wonderful, Tenko-kun. You have such a delicate touch. It's as if you can feel the history of the piece." Tenko looked up, a small, shy smile on his face. The malevolent smirk of Shigaraki was gone, replaced by the bashful expression of a quiet artisan. "Thank you, sensei. I just like making things whole again." The itch was gone. The burning hatred for the world, the voices in his head, the crushing weight of his past, all of it had been lifted. He had no memory of his trauma. He was just Tenko, a quiet man with a talent for fixing broken things. It was a beautiful, poetic irony. And as Izuku watched, he felt a pang of something he identified as righteous satisfaction. I saved him from himself." He shifted his focus. "Show me Toga Himiko." The pool blurred and reformed. He saw her in the garden of a nursing home. She was wearing the simple uniform of a caregiver. She was sitting with an elderly woman in a wheelchair, patiently listening to a long, rambling story about the woman's childhood. Toga's face, once a canvas for ecstatic, bloodthirsty grins, was a picture of serene kindness. Her smile was warm, genuine, but it lacked the manic fire that had once defined her. The all-consuming obsession, the twisted equation of love and violence, had been solved and erased. She gently tucked a blanket around the old woman's legs. "There you go, Suzuki-san. We wouldn't want you to catch a chill. You're such a sweet girl, Himiko-chan," the old woman said, patting her hand. "You take such good care of us." Toga's smile widened slightly. "I like helping people. It makes me feel nice." The word hung in the air. Nice. It was such a small, simple word to replace the vortex of obsession that had once been her soul. Izuku had cured her, too. He had given her the connection she always craved, but in a healthy, normal way. He had made her safe. He had made the world safe from her. The litany continued. He found Jean Babaigawara, twice, working as a quality control inspector on an assembly line. His job was to spot duplicates. The irony was so thick it was almost cruel. He was calm, focused, and utterly alone, but he was no longer lonely. The fractured voices in his head were silent. He found Toya Todoroki, Dabby, in a city archive, working as a records clerk. His skin was still a patchwork of burned scars and staples, a physical memory of a past he no longer emotionally remembered. He spent his days filing away cold cases and historical documents, surrounded by the paper ghosts of tragedy and violence, yet feeling nothing. Once, the pools showed him catching a glimpse of his father, Endeavor, now a high-ranking but powerless public safety administrator, on a public broadcast. Toya's expression didn't even flicker. The inferno of his revenge had been reduced to cold, dead ash. This was the proof. His utopia was working. The worst of them, the most broken, had been mended. He had taken the monsters and made them men, but what of the heroes? He steeled himself. This was always the part that hurt. Show me Katsuki Bakugo. The scene shifted to a state-of-the-art engineering lab. The atmosphere was one of quiet collaboration. And there, at a central holographic design table, was Bakugo. He looked older, his features sharper, but the explosive energy that had always radiated from him was gone. He was working with a team of 3 other engineers, designing a new type of maglev transportation system. One of his colleagues pointed to a flaw in the energy distribution model. We're getting a bottleneck here, Bakugo-san. The power transfer is inefficient by 12%. The Bakugo that Izuku knew would have scoffed, called the man an idiot, and then brilliantly and angrily solved the problem in 5 seconds flat. This Bakugo simply nodded, his expression thoughtful. He studied the hologram, his sharp crimson eyes tracing the lines of energy. You're right, he said, his voice calm and even. The primary conduit is too narrow. If we split the flow here, and create a secondary resonance chamber, like this. He manipulated the hologram with deft, precise gestures. The bottleneck vanished. The efficiency rating on the simulation jumped to 99.8%. Brilliant, his colleague said, genuinely impressed. Bakugo gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. It was a logical solution. There was no triumphant roar. No shine. No explosive declaration of his own genius. He was a prodigy without an ego. A genius without ambition. The competitive fire that had driven him to be the #1 hero, the rage that had been both his greatest flaw and his most powerful motivator, had been extinguished. He was still brilliant, he was still a winner. But he no longer seemed to care about winning. He just was. Izuku watched him, the perfect, productive, passionless citizen, and felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. He had taken Kaken's fire. He had taken the very thing that made him Kaken. Next, Shoto Todoroki. He found him in a middle school classroom. He was a teacher. He was explaining the principles of thermodynamics to a class of attentive, quiet students. He used both hands in his explanation, gesturing to illustrate points about heat and cold, but the gestures were just gestures. There was no subconscious favoring of one side, no lingering tension. He was patient, kind, and his students adored him. The internal war between his father's fire and his mother's ice, the conflict that had defined his entire adolescence, was over. He had found a perfect, tranquil equilibrium. He was whole. He was happy. And he was a shadow of the intense, driven hero he was meant to be. Izuku felt the old, familiar ache. He had done this to them. He had taken their struggles, the very things that forged them into heroes, and erased them. He had stolen their victories. But what was the alternative? A world where they had to keep fighting? A world where Kaken might one day die for him? Where Todoroki might be consumed by his own family's darkness? No. This was better. A quiet life was better than a heroic death. Finally, with a reluctance that was almost physical, he focused the central pool. His heart, a useless, vestigial organ in his new form, clenched. Show me Ochiko Uraraka. The image solidified. He saw the familiar sign of the Uraraka family construction company. Business was good. In this new world of global cooperation and progress, there was a constant need for new infrastructure. He saw her parents, their faces free from the lines of financial worry that had haunted them for so long. They were happy, truly and deeply happy, and he saw her. She was on a worksite, wearing a hard hat and a tool belt, a cheerful smile on her face as she directed a crane operator. She was laughing with her father, the sound a pure, uncomplicated expression of joy. She was home. She was safe. She was helping her family, the dream that had propelled her to UA in the first place. She had gotten everything she wanted. Izuku watched, a lump forming in his throat. This was it. This was the ultimate proof. He had given her a perfect life, a life free from the dangers of hero work, free from financial hardship, free from the terror he had seen on her face on the battlefield. He stayed on the image, watching her go about her day. He watched her eat lunch with her parents. He watched her review blueprints. It was a good, simple, happy life. As the twin suns of Viridia began to cast long, gold-and-silver shadows, the day on Earth was ending. Uraraka stood on the framework of a new high-rise, looking out over the city as the lights began to twinkle on. The city was peaceful. The sky was clear. She sighed, a soft, contented sound. But then, her smile faltered. Her gaze drifted upwards, to the highest point of a neighboring skyscraper, then higher, to the vast, empty sky. A strange, wistful expression crossed her face. Her hand, unconsciously, went to her chest, her fingers pressing lightly against her heart. She felt something. A hollow space. A phantom limb. A ghost of a feeling she couldn't name. It was the memory of weightlessness, the ghost of a dream of floating among the stars. It was the echo of a fierce determination to be a hero, to stand beside her friends, to save people with her own two hands. It was a deep, unexplainable sadness, a quiet ache for a life she didn't know she had lost. She blinked, and the feeling was gone, as fleeting as a forgotten dream. She shook her head, a small, confused frown on her face, before turning to head home for the day. But Izuku had seen it. He had seen the flicker of loss in her eyes. He had felt the echo of her stolen ambition. He pulled back from the pool, his breath catching in his chest. His perfect, serene world suddenly felt fragile, flawed. The architect of peace felt a crack form in the foundation of his own certainty. Was this peace? Or was it just a quieter form of suffering? He stood up, walking to the edge of the porch, his back to the scrying pools. He wrapped his arms around himself, his scarred left arm a cold, heavy weight. He had taken her passion. He had taken the brilliant, burning light in her that had been inspired by him, by the hero he used to be. He had grounded her. It was necessary, he told himself, the thought a desperate reinforcement. He had to believe it. If he didn't, the sheer, crushing weight of his actions would annihilate him. That small sadness, that phantom ache, it's a small price to pay for a world where she will never be in danger again. It's an echo, a fading symptom of the cure. It will pass. He rationalized it as a surgeon might rationalize post-operative pain. The amputation had been necessary to save the patient's life. The phantom limb pain was a regrettable, but acceptable, side effect. Her small, nameless sorrow was an acceptable price for a universe where she would never have to see her friends die, where she would never be vaporized by a Chitauri soldier. He had to believe it. He turned back to the house, his sanctuary, his prison. The pools of starlight behind him shimmered and went dark at his unspoken command. He couldn't watch anymore. Not today. The joy of his success was too deeply intertwined with the agony of its cost. He had achieved his ultimate goal. He had created a world without pain, without conflict, without the need for heroes. He had saved everyone, and in doing so, he had lost them all, drifting alone in his perfect, silent, heartbreaking paradise. He was the sole keeper of the memories of their fire, their passion, their heroic souls. He was the architect of peace, and his throne was the loneliest place in existence. The Avengers' compound was no longer a ruin. It was a mausoleum. Where there had been craters, there was now perfectly level earth, seeded with unnaturally green grass. Where there had been twisted girders and shattered walls, there now stood pristine structures of glass and steel, gleaming under a sun that felt strangely muted. Izuku Midoriya's omnipotent wish had not just erased the damage, it had scoured away the very memory of the battle. There was no dust, no scorch marks, no lingering scent of ozone or blood. There was only a profound and unnerving silence, broken by the gentle sigh of a wind that no longer knew how to howl. Tony Stark stood in the center of his main lab, a place that had once been a symphony of creation. The hum of servers, the crackle of arc welders, the energetic monologues of his own AIS, all of it was gone. His nanite Iron Man suit, which had automatically retracted into its housing unit, was fully charged and ready for deployment, a perfect crimson and gold statue. It was useless. Every advanced weapon system, every defensive protocol, every flight stabilizer was rendered inert by a power that had simply rewritten the laws of physics they relied on. The suit was a multi-billion-dollar paperweight. He was tinkering with a tablet, swiping through global news feeds. His fingers moved with their usual speed, but his actions felt hollow. The arc reactor in his chest, no longer needed for life support but still a potent power source, pulsed with a steady rhythm that felt more like a metronome in a funeral parlor than the beat of a vibrant heart. No wars, he muttered to the empty room, his voice a dry rasp. No crime. No stock market volatility. Global carbon emissions are plummeting because everyone suddenly decided to cooperate. He didn't just save the world. He optimized it. The snark was there, a familiar defense mechanism, but it was brittle, thin ice over an abyss of cold dread. He was a futurist trapped in a world where the future had been decided for him. It was his personal hell. The doors to the lab hissed open, and Steve Rogers walked in, his footsteps unnervingly quiet on the polished floor. He wasn't in his Captain America uniform, but in simple fatigues. He looked rested, healthy, but his blue eyes, usually alight with resolve, were clouded with a deep, weary sorrow. Anything? Steve asked, his voice low. The whole planet is holding hands and singing Kumbaya, Tony quipped, not looking up from the tablet. He fixed global warming, ended world hunger, and probably taught cats and dogs to file joint tax returns. Give the kid a Nobel Prize. Or don't. Ambition is probably outlawed now, so there's no one to award it. Before Steve could respond, a shadow fell over the entrance. Thor Odinson filled the doorway, his sheer presence a defiance to the world's imposed tranquility. Stormbreaker was held loosely in one hand, but his knuckles were white. He had changed into simple Asgardian leathers, but he still radiated a barely contained storm of fury. This quiet is a mockery, Thor boomed, his voice a welcome crack in the suffocating silence. I can feel it in my bones. My connection to the storm, to the thunder, it is muffled. He has put a gag on the throat of the sky itself. Join the club, Point Break, Tony said, finally tossing the tablet onto a workbench with a clatter. My suit is a fancy toaster, and Cap here has probably lost the will to give inspirational speeches. We've been forcibly retired. This is not retirement, Steve said, his tone sharp with conviction. It's imprisonment. As if on cue, the lab's main door opened again. This time it was Dr. Strange. His cloak of levitation settled calmly on his shoulders, its usual playful mannerisms gone, as if it too felt the oppressive peace. With him was a man whose face was known across the globe, Nick Fury, his single eye taking in the entire scene with a cold, analytical glare. But it was the two figures behind them that brought a halt to the conversation. The first was a man so skeletal and frail he looked like a gust of wind could shatter him. His blonde hair drooped around a face etched with profound grief, yet he carried himself with an unmistakable air of dignity and power. Tony's mind, ever the database, put a name to the face from Fury's files, Toshinori Yagi. The retired #1 hero of Japan, All Might. The second figure was a teenager. He had spiky, ash-blonde hair and crimson eyes that burned with a furious, incandescent light that seemed utterly impossible in this tranquil new world. He was a live wire in a city suffering a power outage, a pocket of raw, untamed rage that stood in stark defiance to the universal calm. He paced behind Fury like a caged wolf, his hands clenched into fists, his teeth audibly grinding. This was Katsuki Bakugo. Stark, Rogers, Fury began, his voice its usual gravelly baritone. Glad to see you're still, you? Looks like we have a quorum. Fury, Tony acknowledged with a nod. And you've brought guests. Let me guess, they missed the memo about mandatory peaceful coexistence. He gestured with his chin towards Bakugo, who shot him a look that could have melted steel. They are the reason we're here, Strange said, his voice calm and measured. He stepped forward, becoming the focal point of the room. They, like us, remember. They are, the remnants. I was monitoring global energy signatures when the event happened, Fury explained, cutting to the chase. Saw the spike originate from here. At the same time, I lost contact with 99% of my powered assets. They're all fine, but they're off the board, so to speak. But my deep-level scans picked up a few residual energy pockets. Biologically linked, hardwired abilities that the wave couldn't fully erase. The serum, he nodded to Steve, your Asgardian nature, a glance at Thor, the lingering energy of that stone in your chest, to Strange. And a unique, generational power signature from Japan. He gestured to All Might and Bakugo. All Might was its previous wielder. The boy Bakugo, was briefly exposed to it in a critical moment. It seems to have left a psychic anchor, a scar that made him immune to the mental component of the snap. He remembers everything. And he is displeased. That was the understatement of the millennium. So, what's the play, Strange? Tony asked, crossing his arms. You're the wizard. You saw this coming in one of your 14 million futures, right? Strange's expression tightened. I saw one future where we won. I never saw this. This wasn't a possibility. It was an aberration, a choice made by a variable I couldn't have accounted for, a boy with the power of a god and the heart of a martyr. He began to pace, the way a professor would before a lecture. Thanos wanted to balance the universe. His methods were brutal, but his logic was simple. Midoriya's logic is infinitely more complex. He didn't see a problem of resources. He saw a problem of being. He identified suffering as the core flaw of existence, and conflict as its primary vector. So he performed a cosmic rewrite. He didn't kill the patient. He put them in a medically induced coma. He cured them, Toshinori Yagi whispered, his first words since arriving. His voice was heavy with a guilt that seemed to age him another decade. He cured them of their quirks, their powers, their ambitions, their very souls. He didn't just target powers, Strange continued, his gaze sweeping over them. He targeted the abstract. Rage. Ambition. Greed. Malice. He smoothed the sharp edges of sentience itself. He's a cosmic gardener who decided that any plant that grows too tall or too thorny must be pulled. And we, he gestured to the room, are the weeds he missed. Thor slammed the butt of Stormbreaker onto the floor, the crack of it echoing like a gunshot in the silent lab. Then our path is clear. We find this boy God. We make him see the error of his ways, and if he will not listen to reason, he will listen to the judgment of an avenger. His hand tightened on the axe's handle. A low crackle of lightning, faint and struggling, briefly danced across the metal. You can't be serious, Point Break, Tony scoffed. We're going to punch a kid who can rewrite reality? What's your plan? Ask him to kindly turn your fists back into fists after he turns them into a flock of doves? My fists have crushed the skulls of beings who thought themselves gods. Thor bellowed, his fury palpable. This child is no different. He's entirely different. Strange countered, his voice sharp. He doesn't want to fight you, Thor. He wants to save you. He controls reality. Any physical assault is utterly, laughably futile. He could turn your lightning into gentle rain. He could erase Stormbreaker from existence with a thought. He could make you forget why you were even angry in the first place and give you a sudden, overwhelming desire to take up knitting. You are trying to solve a philosophical problem with a hammer. It was then that the caged wolf broke free. Shut up! The scream was so raw, so full of undiluted rage, that everyone in the room flinched. Bakugo, who had been vibrating with suppressed fury, finally exploded. He stalked into the center of the circle, his crimson eyes blazing as he glared at each of them in turn. Just shut up, all of you! He snarled, his voice a ragged saw blade of sound. You're talking about him like he's some kind of problem to be solved. Like he's a math equation. He jabbed a finger in Thor's direction. And you? You want to fight him? You think that's what this is about? Another villain to punch? He let out a harsh, bitter laugh that held no humor. You don't get it. None of you get it. That damn nerd. Deku, he didn't do this to be a villain. He did it because he's a coward. The accusation hung in the air, stunning the Avengers into silence. Even Fury looked taken aback. A coward? Steve repeated, his brow furrowed. Son, from what I saw, he was one of the bravest people on that field. Brave? Bakugo wheeled on him, his expression a mask of pure, contemptuous disbelief. He saw what it really costs. He saw people get hurt, he saw people die, and he couldn't handle it. The stupid, bleeding heart idiot couldn't take the pressure of being a real hero, so he broke the whole damn game so no one could play anymore. He started pacing, his movements sharp and aggressive. He didn't save anyone. He caged them. He put the entire universe in a king zoo where all the animals are declawed and defanged and fed on a schedule so they never have to hunt again. He calls that mercy? I call it the ultimate insult. His wild gaze landed on All Might, and his expression twisted with a fresh wave of anger and pain. And you're the one who told him he could be a hero. You gave him that power. You filled his head with all that save everyone crap, but you never taught him the most important lesson, that you can't. You can't save everyone. Some people don't want to be saved, and sometimes people have to save themselves. That's what it means to be strong. That's what it means to be alive. He stopped, breathing heavily, his chest heaving. His voice dropped, the rage momentarily giving way to a raw, aching grief that was far more potent. He took it all away, he whispered, looking at his own powerless hands. The drive. The fight. The burning in your gut that makes you want to be better than everyone else. The dream of standing at the top, not because someone put you there, but because you clawed your way up, tooth and nail. He took my rivalry. His eyes, shimmering with unshed tears of rage, met All Might's. He took me. He looked back at the Avengers. I don't want to be saved by him. I want to look him in the eye and have the chance to punch him in his stupid, freckled face for what he did. Not to beat him, just to feel something real again. And then I want my damn world back. The silence that followed his tirade was heavy and absolute. He had put into words the visceral wrongness they all felt. He had given a voice to the silent scream trapped in the heart of the new world. He had articulated the theft not of power, but of purpose. Tony Stark, for the first time since the snap, looked utterly serious, his usual snark completely gone. He looked at the furious, grieving teenager and saw a reflection of his own caged, impotent genius. Steve Rogers' expression was one of deep, empathetic pain. He had listened to a boy describe, in the rawest terms, the theft of the very free will he had dedicated his life to defending. Thor's righteous anger had subsided, replaced by a grim understanding. The boy was right. This was not a problem to be solved with a hammer. It was a wound that needed to be confronted. All Might simply closed his eyes, a tear finally escaping and tracing a path down his hollow cheek. Bakugo's words were a dagger of truth, and he accepted the blow. He had failed his successor. He had failed them both. It was Strange who finally spoke, his voice quiet but firm. He's right. About the fight, at least. We cannot confront the god. He paused, letting the weight of his next word sink in. But we might be able to reach the boy. All eyes turned to him. When I looked into the future, Strange began, I saw one victory. In that timeline, Tony made the sacrifice. But the principle remains the same. The gauntlet, especially when wielded by a being of immense will, doesn't just grant a wish. It interprets it. The result we're living in is not a cold, logical command. It is the deepest, most desperate desire of Izuku Midoriya's heart, made manifest. He looked at All Might. You know him better than anyone. This cowardice that young Bakugo speaks of, it is born from an empathy so profound it has become a poison. He is a boy who feels the pain of the entire world as if it were his own. And on that battlefield, he was connected to the mind and soul stones. He felt it all at once. And it broke him. Strange's gaze became distant, as if he were peering through the veil of reality itself. I can feel him. He is not sitting on a throne, laughing. He is alone. He has built himself a paradise that is also a prison. He is the warden, and he is the sole inmate. The god persona, the architect of this piece, is a construct. It's a defense mechanism. Beneath it, he looked at All Might. Beneath it is the person you know. The crying child you once found on a rooftop. A spark of hope, faint but real, ignited in the room. What are you proposing? Steve asked. A rescue mission, Strange said simply. Not a war. We can't punch him into submission. But we might be able to talk him down. We can't fight the god, but we can stage an intervention for the boy. We need to get to him, bypass the divine architect, and speak directly to the broken hero underneath. We need to make him see the flaw in his perfect world. We need to make him understand what he has truly taken away. And how do we do that? Tony asked, the engineer in him already seeing the impossible mechanics of the problem. Ring his celestial doorbell? He knows we're here. He probably knows what we're talking about right now. He could want us out of existence before you finish your sentence. He could, Strange admitted. But he won't. His wish was to end the hurting. Killing us, erasing us, would be an act of harm. It would violate the very core principle of his new reality. He is trapped by his own benevolence. He will let us come to him. He will try to convince us that he is right. It's a debate, then, Steve surmised. A debate for the soul of the universe. Precisely, Strange confirmed. And we need to bring the right arguments. Logic from you, Stark. A plea for freedom from you, Rogers. A reminder of noble struggle from you, Thor. His eyes then settled on the two heroes from Japan. But the most important arguments will come from you. He looked at All Might. You are his father figure. You must be the voice of the hero he once aspired to be. Then, he turned to Bakugo, whose furious energy had coalesced into a sharp, dangerous focus. And you are his rival. His anchor. His equal and his opposite. Your rage, your memory, your shared history. It may be the only thing sharp enough to cut through his divine delusion and reach the Deku he's buried. A heavy silence fell as the sheer, monumental audacity of the plan settled over them. It was a heist for a soul. A psychological infiltration of a god's mind. It was the most desperate, improbable gambit in the history of the cosmos. It was their only shot. Okay, Tony said, breaking the silence. He pushed himself off the workbench, a flicker of his old, determined fire back in his eyes. So, we're putting together a team to go talk a kid out of being God. Feels on brand, actually. Fury nodded, his one eye glinting. I'll coordinate from here. Provide any intel I can scrape from this quiet new world. But you'll be on your own out there. Steve Rogers stood tall, his posture once again that of a leader. We've faced worse odds. Thor gripped Stormbreaker, his expression no longer one of blind rage, but of grim, focused purpose. For all the worlds. All Might looked at the small, determined group, a flicker of his old light returning to his eyes. He thought of his boy, alone on some distant world, crushed under the weight of his own kindness. We will not fail him. Bakugo said nothing. He just cracked his neck, his crimson eyes fixed on a point in the distance only he could see. He was no longer just a powder keg. He was a weapon, aimed and ready, not for a battle of fists, but for a war of hearts. And he would be the one to land the final, devastating blow. They were no longer just Avengers or pro-heroes. They were a handful of glitches in a perfect program, ghosts of a chaotic past. They were the remnants, and their mission was set, to journey to the heart of a peaceful paradise, and save their friend from his own salvation, even if it meant unsaving the universe to do it.